Hello and welcome to another edition of Capital Calculus. I'm your host, Anil Padmanabhan. A very happy new year to you. I really hope the year works out for you, for the country, and for the world. In little over a fortnight from now, Donald Trump will take oath of office as the next president of the United States. Going by his first stint and recent remarks and appointments, it is very clear that Trump 2.0 will be more than just a handful for the rest of the world. Further, the US economy has not wilted as many had forecast. This only strengthens the hand that has been dealt to President elect Trump. The big question then is, what does India do under Trump 2.0? Especially given the fact that it is chasing some ghosts of its own too. Will Modi 3.0 be able to recreate the magic with his American counterpart? To answer this and more, I spoke to Harsh Shringla. He is the former Foreign Secretary to the Government of India and one of the most astute observers of the world's politics, economics, and diplomacy. I began by asking Harsh about a recent assertion by Gordon Brown, the former UK Prime Minister, arguing that the world was transitioning from a rules based regime to one that is power based.
Well, I think he's not wrong because what we are seeing really is a weakening of global governance. Those institutions that were created post Second World War, like the United Nations, the Bretton Woods institutions, worked well for a certain period of time. But from the turn of the century, we have seen that they have not been able to perform to expectations, and they've not been able to live up to the requirements of the 21st century. In other words, the current realities. I think many of these institutions and organizations haven't really made the necessary adjustments that reflect a changed reality in the world. There are, I think, far more demands on organizations like the UN, whether it's the SDGs, whether it is in terms of climate change, whether it is in terms of managing conflicts, global conflicts or regional conflicts, or on the Bretton Woods institutions to ensure general macroeconomic stability, to ensure that small vulnerable economies don't go under. And I think in most of these tasks we have seen a very dismal rate of performance. The SDGs have only performed up to I think about 19%, even though we have crossed the 50% mark in terms of the timelines for implementation of the SDGs. We have seen that 60% of the global south, the developing world, is either indebted or in danger of indebtedness. We've also seen that global warming is a reality, and that the efforts to counter, mitigate, and adapt to global warming haven't been commensurate to the sort of threat it poses to mankind and our entire planet. So, in from that point of view, I think we have a sort of a crisis of global governance that is giving way to what I think Gordon Brown referred to as a power-based order, as opposed to a rules-based order. And it's for the global community to set the rules and to make sure that those rules are implementable and that they reflect the current realities of the situation. So I think this is a concern.
So, Harsh, when you look at India's situation at this point of time, we have done remarkably well on the economic side. But in a world which is going to be in such so conflict ridden, and yes, the earlier institutions were not very equitable, but at least they were functioning. Now, if they are not there in a power based order, how does India steer its course?
So you have a world today that is not only divided north and south, which is in economic terms, but it's also divided east and west, which is basically the Western powers vis-a-vis, say, Russia and China. I'm just giving broadly. a sense of the ideological divide that exists. Now, India is one country that has straddled that ideological space. We are a permanent invitees to the G7. We're members of the Quad. At the same time, we are members of BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. We are able to speak to parties across the board, which is what enabled Prime Minister Modi to go both to Ukraine and Russia and speak to the presidents there and pursue an agenda for peace. When we took on the presidency of the G20 in 2022, late 2022, I think it was a very difficult time in the world, and there was a sense that the G20 itself would be a victim of its own, I would say, representativeness, given that the ideological divide cut across the G20. But India took on the presidency with its, broad, let's say, within the broad framework of what we call Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The world is one family, and we approached the entire G20 issues that were involved within that general philosophy. In other words, we looked at working with all our partners, ensuring that they understood the importance of the G20 in resolving global issues of the day, which is not conflict, but it actually conflict is diverting us from what is more important, indebtedness of nation states. As I said, climate change, issues relating to lack of access, to various amenities, whether it's healthcare, it's education, it's poverty, hunger. I mean, all of these things are very, very important at a global level. But there was a certain sense that the world was preoccupied with conflict. And conflict at the same time had its collateral impact on smaller developing economies, which we saw in the case of Sri Lanka or in many African countries that went under because of the stresses of both the COVID-19 pandemic and the ensuing, Ukraine conflict. So India's role really was what we call human-centric globalization, working for the global common good.
So, Harsh, actually, good you mentioned G20 because that's also the moment where Prime Minister Modi sought to reintroduce the IMEC with all the relevant parties present, including the United States. So, do you see IMEC as a new trade route that India is co-authoring with other countries, not only to ring fence the trade for all the countries who fall on this route, but also in creating an alternative which is a more secure supply chain connecting all these countries, particularly Europe, Middle East, and India?
I think the India, Middle East, Europe corridor was one of the most important initiatives, which came on I would say, which really sought to supplement the Abraham's Accord, because once there was peace in the Middle East, you could have a corridor that linked India, the Middle East, and Europe, providing a new sort of a trade route for I would say, economic sustainability, and would provide a fresh economic impetus to countries across the board. And of course, this was interrupted by the events in the Middle East. And I think once things stabilize, we should be able to go back to reviving that concept, because all of our partners are quite wedded to the idea of providing this sort of corridor that would unite Europe, the Middle East, and India.
But strategically, how do you see it, this IMEC corridor? Because you see, the traditional route, the Houthis have kind of torpedoed the idea. So now ships are coming all the way around the Cape of Good Hope. And is this part of the play that you secure not only India, but all the countries along this trade route?
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, a number of the countries that have involved, many of them are landlocked, some of them are not on the trade route. I think it provides a new basis for supply lines and supply chains. You're quite right in saying that we need alternative options today, because The Suez Canal route is being increasingly unviable because of the Houthis. But we cannot also take the long route via the Cape of Good Hope, because there is commercial viability is affected. Then goods become more expensive, and I think your shipping time becomes much longer. So this is the real, on a strategic level, this is very important. It brings countries into play. It connects continents. It provides the basis for cooperation between countries that actually were in conflict. And I think the sooner we can implement this, the better it would be for the Middle East and for our entire region.
This, I want to draw your attention to a fact that will play out on 20th January when President Trump takes over the US presidency. His first term and PM Modi and he struck a good chord. Now he's coming into the second term with a new set of advisors, particularly someone like Elon Musk, who has commercial interests which could spill over into political interests of his own. So, how do you see this Trump presidency playing out from India's point of view, particularly given the fact that we have warmed up our relationships over the last 2 decades to degrees one could never have imagined in the 1990s, early 90s, sorry.
So I think you're right in assuming that Trump 2.0 will not be the same as Trump 1.0. It's a very different, going to be a very different animal. I mean, Trump is more greatly empowered. He's got far more experience. He's got his team together very quickly, and I think there'll be much less discordance and dissensions within the team that he's put together. He, as you said, has a very strong connect with Prime Minister Modi, and he is very, very fond of India. At the same time, he does look at India as being a country that has high tariff barriers. We've been working on that in Trump 1.0 also, and there was in that endeavor, we were working towards a free trade agreement, and a good amount of progress had been made on a partial free trade agreement. And perhaps if we, dust off the same sort of notes that were ready at that time, we have the blueprint of a new partial free trade agreement ready. But we also need to look at how we can increase and enhance our exchanges with the United States. And I think that has been a constant endeavor. But we have an opportunity now to take it to the next strategic level. So whether it is trade, whether it is services, whether it is technology, I think we should really up our, game with the United States now with Trump there. And keep in mind that Trump's policies also fit in many senses with ours, because he's going to provide a huge stimulus to businesses with tax cuts, corporate incentives. It's a good time for Indian corporates to invest in the United States. As you saw, the Adani Group had talked about a $10 billion investment in energy security and infrastructure. So, similarly, many other companies will look at a great move forward in that direction. And I think we should be able to look at those convergences while minimizing any disruptions that could come our way, in terms of how the United States and President Trump would look at the relationship. But on the whole, I think stable energy prices, putting an end to conflict, providing a more conducive environment for businesses. The U.S. economy also impacts on economies across the globe. So a strong U.S. economy is good for us.
But Harsh, India has a problem. Its Achilles heel is India Inc. They are not competitive. The PLI scheme was introduced primarily to resolve this challenge for various reasons. It's not just the problem with India Inc., the interest costs, etc. A lot of things pile up, logistics. So, how do you see this playing out? While India may be able to negotiate a partial FTA, but when you implement it, how do you see India Inc. holding its own, which will obviously it's against severe competition?
Well, I mean, look, we have to work out the logistical and infrastructure gaps in our system. Production costs are higher in India as compared to many other countries. There are various historic reasons for that. We have to try and address those reasons and ensure that it is a competitive environment. In other words, we have to some extent, reduce barriers in order to have access to raw materials at cheaper prices. Focus on manufacturing that would give us value addition and return. I think right now the customs duties and taxation really doesn't distinguish between essential raw materials and those that you need for and export, and those that are basically consumer products that actually you shouldn't have at all within India, because those are, you produce the same products and they're not indispensable. So I think it's important to sort out some of those kinks in the system, make production competitive in India so that Make in India can be a success. I think the PLI has achieved a reasonable amount of success in terms of the Apple story, which has gone from zero to $14 billion. Many of our automobile majors are producing electric vehicles under the PLI scheme. And I think renewable energy has also been an area which has been reasonably successful. But the rate of pickup, of course, is something that we have to examine, and it really, I think there needs to be a constant process of economic reform. I mean, the government has initiated major reforms, whether it's GST, it's the NCLT system, a range of reforms across the board. But it needs constant reform, because we have had 60 years of really license Raj rule, and strategic adjustment has been only for a certain period of time, and then seem to go back into that comfortable sphere. But we need to reform. We need labor reforms. We need reforms in land, in capital. So essentially, the factors of production have to be looked into, and we have to look at where we can bring in essential reforms, which can make our economy highly competitive.
So, finally, Harsh, what is the big priority that India should focus on in 2025?
I think from our point of view, the endeavor should be to focus on our own economic growth and development. I think the India growth story has been a very promising one. We are growing at a very fast pace, but we also have many challenges, whether it is in terms of the number of young people joining the workforce every month, whether it is in terms of ensuring that there's enough skilling and training for that, youthful demographics that we have, whether it's in terms of the reform process that we spoke about, economic reform process that needs to continue, or whether it's in the form of, I would say, challenges that come from elsewhere on the external environment. I think we need to ensure that our external environment is controlled to the extent that we can focus on growth and development. We should not be distracted by various, whether it's conflicts, whether it is asymmetrical development in our neighborhood, whether it is terrorism or radicalism. I think we need to make sure that our foreign policy should work on creating an environment that is conducive for our economic growth and development, that can also attract foreign investments. That is the best way of getting in, I would say, resources into our economic development. The cheapest way, it's far more preferable to bank loans. So we can, interest countries in our economy that is better. Keep in mind that China's growth story has been at a time when the external environment was very benign. It supported that growth story. Today, it's a different case. I think it is a far more competitive environment. Countries are, looking inwards, and when we talk of, MAGA, and when we talk about, our own priorities in Atmanirbhar Bharat and Make in India, there are parallels. So countries are looking at their own economies, and I think the sort of free run that China got in terms of its accelerated development, in the 1980s and 90s, I think is something that we have not received. This is our time. This is our time to really grow. We are far from having plateaued, and I think we are in a more competitive and challenging environment. We have to work to ensure that those distractions that come our way are settled, are addressed, and that they do not really impinge or I would say slow down our absolutely ordained growth story.
As Harsh rightly points out, Trump 2.0 is unlikely to be a copy of Trump 1.0. We have already seen with his appointments that he is better prepared. Second, the US economy, which is the anchor of the world, is doing well. Third, he has already signaled that on day one, he will be imposing fresh tariffs on imports from China, Mexico, and Canada. So essentially, from day one, the world will be in churn. In other words, return to the world of VUCA. VUCA, as you know, is an acronym for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. The big thing is whether India can cope with the world of VUCA. It has done well in the last 4 years in fighting off and thriving during repeated shocks to the world economy, beginning with COVID-19. But now it is very clear that if India has to mount a defense against a Trump 2.0's tariff actions or demands for freer trade, then economic reforms have to resume. They have virtually been put on hold in the last 2 years given the deep political divide within the country. So while it is easier said than done, India has no options. So brace for a very stormy 2025. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to StratNews Global on YouTube. Hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any updates. And please do share your thoughts, ideas and suggestions with us. I'm available on Twitter at Capital Calculus. I'll be back next week with another episode. Till then, stay safe.